The film opens with a young man frantically running out of a building, making a sudden U-turn and speeding down the road as if chased by a ghost, then dashing into a parking garage, swerving and weaving as if trying to show off his street racing skills. Behind him, a yellow car tailgates him relentlessly as if trying to crush him against the wall. The photo shows him running close to the edge of the tunnel to dodge a sweat-drenched gold-grinding attack, before escaping. The young man still managed to glare back at the guy in the striped shirt in the car, as if arranging a fair revenge. The protagonist is a hardworking and kind young man who delivers butter. He conveniently throws away trash for customers before continuing to work tirelessly delivering orders from morning till night without missing a single delivery. While on the road, he called his younger sibling at home to remind them to eat properly so they wouldn't starve, right in front of the food stall. The delivery driver accidentally bumped into a girl, who then turned around and cursed at him, calling him a dead dog, which was enough to make him faint. The male protagonist arrived later and reminded the delivery driver that there was a traffic jam ahead and he should watch out for tough guys. The delivery guy thanked him profusely and even gave him the male protagonist's portion of food that he had mistakenly taken for him. Suddenly, a red car sped past, dragging the bag of food a considerable distance. How infuriating, it turned out to be the car carrying the snobbish girl and her unruly boyfriend who were in cahoots with her. So the male protagonist sped off on his motorbike, chasing after them relentlessly, weaving through congested streets as smoothly and skillfully as possible. He sped past the incredibly cool-looking red car like he was racing, then blocked its path to teach the young man a lesson. He brought a bag of food and demanded that the arrogant young man pay properly. People around them were talking, pointing, and taking pictures of the girl. The girl was so humiliated that she urged her boyfriend to quickly hand over the money to end the matter. The male lead brought food to tea after his extra classes, acting like a true older brother. Then the two brothers ate and chatted animatedly. The male lead even showed off pictures of his newly decorated shop, saying it looked pretty good. This prompted Tezin to bluntly remark that his older brother had the same taste as their mother, and that his younger brother wanted to take the food home to eat while watching YouTube for the complete entertainment combo. The male lead then scolded his brother harshly to bring him back to his senses before calming down, and concluding that he was going alone to appease their mother this time because his younger brother Tin was about to come home to his room, with a pile of new books. I sat down at a few tables, and saw a message from T-Dung transferring 50,000 gold, like a parent-teacher association subsidy. Then I turned on my stream and studied with everyone for 5 hours to get in the mood, while the male protagonist was still diligently carrying soil and sand to decorate the shop like a plow. I'm sure that guy's name is T-Dung, no doubt about it. His girlfriend bought food to treat the whole group to a celebratory meal for Zon T-1E5. T-Dung confided in his girlfriend that he would continue delivering butter until the shop stabilized because he needed to earn money for T-Zin's education and to pay off debts. After their friends left, the two of them stood kissing passionately in the alley. The next morning, T-Dung thoughtfully cooked breakfast for his girlfriend and while emptying the trash can found a wrapper from a pack of 3 wolves that fell with a thud. After that, he continued diligently delivering goods while climbing the stairs. T-Dung noticed a wilting plant and pulled it into a corner as if rescuing a plant, even leaving a note saying that this type of plant only needs half a day of sun or it will wither. As soon as he stopped his motorbike, an old woman asked him to help carry her things up the hill, and he enthusiastically did it to fulfill his chivalrous duty. That evening, the male protagonist was enjoying his meal at the convenience store when he heard someone's forgotten phone ringing loudly. It turned out a girl claiming to be the owner of the phone asked T-Dung to bring it to her so he could get it done quickly, but he was busy and immediately refused. Hearing this, the girl said she would pay T-Dung 300,000 gold. He only agreed because her mother had a leg injury afterward. The male protagonist went into the convenience store, carrying his phone which was properly recorded by the camera, and immediately got into his car and left to be on time like a gust of wind. He arrived at the address the girl had given him, only to find the surroundings deserted and dark. Suddenly the phone rang again. The girl said her mother wasn't feeling well, and instructed him to put the phone in the emergency call box in the tunnel. T-Dung suggested delivering it to his house for convenience, but she refused, saying she was embarrassed about a man coming to her house, which made sense. The male protagonist agreed, put the phone in the box, and took the envelope of payment neatly. Just as he turned back to his car, a truck suddenly flashed its lights, screeched to a halt as if about to crash into him, making his heart pound like a drum, then swerved and disappeared, leaving the terrified man running away. The next morning he was busy tending to his mother's grave, lighting incense and whispering to her. He begged her not to be angry because his younger brother was still busy studying. Unexpectedly, his brother brought home the exact flower pot his mother liked. But unfortunately, his older brother hadn't prepared a share for him, so he had to eat his brother's share to make it to school on time. That day it was raining heavily, and while he was busy tending to hundreds of dollar lotus pots, someone broke into the garden and trampled on the seedlings like they were plowing a field. Those people stormed in and arrested him on charges of rape. Now they're even claiming there's some kind of recruitment drive, leaving the protagonist completely bewildered. Then the police took T-Dung to the station. Reporters swarmed him, asking what kind of feud he had with the 20-year-old girl that he would expose her like that. The news was all over the TV, and his girlfriend just sent a short message asking if T-Dung was very busy. The police questioned T-Dung again, and even though he insisted he didn't know who the girl in the photo was, his anger flared up, only to be met with another insult, a complete dose of bitterness. Before he was even dragged out by the forensic team to have samples taken, he still wouldn't let her make a call because he was worried about the plants at the shop outside. People were gossiping about the murder case like a marketplace in chaos that night. His girlfriend vaguely suspected her boyfriend had been arrested and was restless. The next morning, when her friends came to visit, Dung finally felt relieved. But then someone reported that his personal information had been completely leaked online. His girlfriend went to the shop and found it vandalized by angry people. The workers continued to treat Dung badly, refusing to listen to his explanation, leaving him feeling helpless and resentful. A lawyer, seeing Dung's picture, felt sorry for him and agreed to help. His girlfriend was so worried that she had to temporarily close her shop, working with a lawyer. She learned that the girl's name was Suji. Everyone advised Suji to visit Dung to help him feel better. Upon meeting, Dung apologized for causing her distress. Suji immediately asked, "Is that all? Is there anything else?" At this point he yelled that he hadn't done it. Suji was overwhelmed with emotion upon hearing this, as she also believed her boyfriend wasn't that kind of person. She promised to do everything she could to clear his name. Afterwards she met with a lawyer along with Zin and some friends. To clear his name, all they needed was an alibi. The problem was that the victim's time of death couldn't be precisely determined. The male lead, who delivers butter all over the city like a whirlwind, makes it even harder to pinpoint the exact delivery time, so everyone immediately thinks of checking the delivery history to be sure. Currently, Dung is wearing a prisoner's uniform and working with the prosecutor. Afterwards, he tries to remember everything he's done so he can tell Suji when she visits. She and her friends go through all the delivery receipts and diligently ask around at each place. They even carefully gathered all the camera footage and photos proving Dung's presence at those locations to complete the file. Finally, they put together such a neat schedule that even the lawyer nodded in amazement. He believed their side was sure to win with all that evidence, so he asked permission to submit the entire file. At this point, Suji realized her boyfriend hadn't even bothered to eat properly. He was so worried he'd forgotten to eat. On the day of the trial, the whole group was present to cheer for Dung, and a strange man also appeared. The lawyer presented Dung's work schedule with all the necessary invoices, cameras, and photos to prove his innocence. Dung was allowed to speak with the prosecution, and they acknowledged his alibi but still raised a few points of contention that needed clarification. First, the delivery to the victim's house, which usually takes 3 minutes, took 7 minutes that time, making it suspicious. Dung remembered moving lock those belongings inside to avoid sunburn and leaving a note next. There was a picture of Dung carrying the suitcase uphill right after delivering the prosthetic leg to the old woman. The prosecution argued that the suitcase was identical to the one found by the river, shocking him because he had only helped someone. They then questioned why Dung kept the victim's phone, and showed him a convenience store security camera recording of him holding the phone, along with footage of him standing in front of the cellar where he returned the phone. The prosecution claimed he was lying and continued to assert Dung's guilt using the crime scene footage. They said the victim's body had been left in the bathroom of an empty apartment on another floor of the same building. The body was soaked in warm water to erase any signs of foul play. They also announced the discovery of bodily fluids believed to belong to the killer in the victim's body, and the male suspect's bracelet was found there. The semen analysis results shocked Dung, while the prosecutor relentlessly pressed charges, causing him to erupt in a fit of rage. Suji's eyes were red with disbelief and fear. The prosecutor even showed CCTV footage that there was no sign of auspicious symbols at the scene. Dung was dragged away amidst whispers as if she were a vicious enemy. Afterwards, Suji reported that the lawyer in charge had given up, and Zin was frantically searching for someone else, but it was proving difficult. The male lead apologized to his girlfriend, but Suji asked where the bracelet he had given her was. It was then that he realized he had lost it. Suji was heartbroken when she said she saw the bracelet at the scene and felt betrayed, thinking he had someone else. She took off her own bracelet, left it in the visiting room, and turned away. That night, Dung was taken away in a vehicle along with the others amidst the frantic screams of the crowd. Amidst menacing faces and defiant stares, he was escorted down to a damp, dark cell in the basement, his only sounds being the pounding of his heart and the overwhelming sense of dread. Episode 3. Somewhere an auction of statues was raging, prices soaring like a runaway train. A young man bidding online from a secretive private space was constantly pressing the button, while an older man joined in, raising the price in a duel with other online bidders. At the close of the auction, the statue fell into the hands of that young man. Just then, the phone rang. It was Chairman Mi-ong-ho calling. It turned out that the man from earlier was Mi-ong-ho himself. He sarcastically asked if the young man could trade it for something of more obvious value besides the statue to make things easier. The masked young man calmly retorted, "How much is the old man's life worth?" Then, in a rather irritating statement, he concluded that he only wanted the statue of Ao, the one that could scream. The chairman strained to push the price up to 4 billion. The young man jumped to 4.5 billion, and from then on each increment of half a billion made the chairman's heart pound. Mi-Ong-ho started clutching his chest because of the wallet aching and his heart pounding. But in the end he managed to buy the statue for 6 billion. In a state of utter exhaustion as if he had just run a marathon, the identical red car pulled into the villa. The young man who had driven up the price appeared and received the 6 billion statue from the chairman. He whispered eerily that the man who went to prison in place of his son had died from choking on a page of the Bible. Hearing this, it became clear he was the mastermind behind the meticulously planned service of taking someone else's place in prison, in a meeting room. The young man sat there munching on a chocolate bar as if it were a mental boost when the phone rang. It was the guy who had just scattered newspaper and needed cleaning up. He waved his hand and told him to clean it up himself. As for the land deal, he told the staff to buy it outright without bargaining. The scene cuts to him standing in a gloomy, thick room, staring at the tightly wrapped, cold corpse, then placing down his glasses. Also covered in soot, they were so shiny that a mouse licking them would die on the spot. Back at the prison camp, he's ambushed and dragged away to be beaten by a mob. But he calmly says he doesn't like it and won't go. Everyone freezes. The principal laughs, saying he knows how to resist now, and orders his henchmen to attack. But the guy is now in good shape with bulging muscles and six-pack abs, so he easily beats up the gang. The shrimps were swarming around him. And the sheer number of them pushed him against the window, shattering the glass and leaving his face dripping with saliva. Yet he still managed to clean himself up, lay him sprawled on the ground, and then stood before the principal, saying curtly, "Don't mess with me again." This left the principal speechless with fear. Meanwhile, the two girls entered another room and Suji appeared with a new, more rebellious look, a cigarette clutched between her fingers, spewing foul language. The old man then nonchalantly rummaged through his wallet, taking out all the money except for the exact amount the girl had paid for the kimbap. His expression was indifferent, as if Tae-dung was at fault for seeing a picture of him with his ex-boyfriend that showed him being overly intimate. When she left, the old man, as if by magic, slipped the money back into his pocket, bringing the scene to a close. Suddenly the priest appeared, startling him. The priest delivered the news about T. Then slammed the Bible down on the table, indicating that something big had happened. Back at the prison camp, the headmaster kept muttering Tae-dung's name like a mantra, then stood up and said he needed to deal with something urgent. Two guys were boasting about how 8 guys from Unit 282 had beaten him up, so things had been much quieter lately. The final line was that it would be better if the principal didn't step down. Unexpectedly, the main character, standing right in the corner, heard every word and immediately rushed out, launching into a brawl. His gang members spread their arms to block the guards from interfering, like a battle formation guarding the courtyard. Just then a new person entered the area, and several other young men clamored to greet him. That guy Kang Dai asked to challenge Dak Su to a duel, and Och responded with a slap that sent him spinning like the wind. The guard arrived, but before he could even yell, the headmaster, his face still arrogant as if he owned the place, had to follow the guard because a supervisor was calling him. He was taken to a room as dark as an inkwell. In the distance, someone sat in a chair with their hands clasped together, looking like a deliberately placed electrical switch. The supervisor cleared his throat and asked, "Which one of you has been injured lately?" Rumors spread like wildfire, but he restrained himself by adding, "One guy's already dead. One could be called accidental, but the other was due to poor management." Hearing this, the old headmaster, his face still as thick as a shield, remained completely silent. The warden slid his hand across the table, handing over the list of new recruits along with a message as gentle as a sledgehammer. "Now that you've been accepted, teach them a lesson." It turned out the old man at the shop was Uncle Dong Zich, an old fellow prisoner. He had visited Tae-dung and said he'd bought some tonics for the male protagonist. He pressed him for details, asking if he was alright because the priest's account had worried him, and he feared Tae-dung might want to log out himself. Tae-dung reassured them that nothing was wrong, he was just looking elsewhere to catch his breath. Then he asserted that he hadn't committed any crime and wanted to leave the place as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the grumpy headmaster held a meeting with his subordinates about Tae-dung's incident, but the supervisor had instructed them to be patient. So they all swallowed their anger. One soldier, Dai-dong, was punching and kicking, saying, "I'll endure it, not you. So you just teach Tae-dung a lesson for me." That night, the young man secretly studied documents related to the cases. Memorizing every word, the next morning while working, he secretly devised an escape plan. Tae-dung observed the soldiers' everyday clothes to find hiding places, and observed the keyring to learn the routes and paths. He meticulously monitored the guard shift change, carefully inspecting every doorway and even the ventilation shafts while working as a janitor. He jotted down all the information he knew. As soon as a fellow inmate entered, he quickly hid his papers. The protagonist lay with his back turned, pretending to sleep. But the other person was none other than Dai-dong. That night, Dai-dong tried to stab him in the back, but he was prepared and dodged the attack. This guy even egged them on, telling them to shout for fun, so Tae-dung and Tan-dai were immediately called out for their insolence. The two were evenly matched, fighting fiercely in the room until the floor shook like a drum. The next morning at roll call, Tae-dung showed up as if nothing had happened, making the principal glare at her so intensely it felt like his eyes were going to pop out. And that was the moment the protagonist decided he had to get rid of this thorn in his side. During dinner, He brought his tray and sat down right in front of old man Doc Soo. His gang members were about to move to protect their boss when the headmaster, realizing Dung was now a formidable figure, sternly told them to shut up and eat. The protagonist stated directly that if the headmaster stopped interfering, he would let it go, but the old man refused to compromise. Dung retorted, "You dared to rape someone's sister, why don't you admit it?" The enraged man lunged at the young man, punching him and then sweeping his hand across the guard. This time, the protagonist deliberately didn't fight back, and when the chief guard arrived, the principal was subdued with a taser and lay motionless. Dung refused to go to the infirmary, only asking them to handle the principal according to the law. The thorn in his side was finally removed. Kang Dai watched, nodding in agreement, finding the male protagonist quite interesting. Later, while Dung was watering the plants, the prison guard came to report that the assailant had been placed in solitary confinement. He also said that if Dung wanted to sue, he would help. The male protagonist shook his head as usual, leaving the guard puzzled as he clearly had the right to sue. He gave the guy a gift, and before leaving he mentioned that he had requested a transfer to Section B, but they had run out of slots there, so he would have to stay in Section A for now. Dung took the pieces of foam the guard gave him to plant a tree, but was stopped. However, he just said the guard had asked him to, and he passed through the gate in a flash. He placed the pot on the shelf, carefully covered it with a box, and then left. That night he sat hunched over at his desk, turning to ask Dong if he was planning to continue tonight. The other guy sighed and confessed, "I specialize in sneak attacks, but you dodged them all, so I'm helpless. Last night was a close call, so now I can only sit and supervise." The next morning, a guy was puffing on a cigarette when the protagonist dragged him in and punched him to wake him up. That's why it was absent from the cleaning team in Area B. Dung immediately volunteered to take on its task. Having obtained the key, he went back to where he had hidden the potted plant, pressed the key into the foam to create a neat mold, then carried the pot out as if carrying a flower. Next, he poured glue into the mold to create the key. Carefully, he covered it with soil to make it look as if no one had ever been there. After finishing, he put the basins away in his vaulted cell to hide the goods. One rainy day, someone from the Ministry of Justice came to visit. The doctor who accompanied him was none other than the young man who masterminded the service of substituting prisoners for others. He glanced and recognized prisoner 282 as Dung, but calmly went into the injection area. The guard handed him the list of prisoners along with their medical records, and upon seeing Dung's name, he instinctively reached for the secret medicine compartment in his pocket. At the mechanic's workshop, there was an announcement about vaccinations, so everyone started leaving except for Dung, who stayed behind to help the guard repair a car. The guard even told him to go eat first and then buy a hamburger for him. When the area was empty, the young man returned to the workshop, drew a stencil onto a piece of metal, and then sawed and forged with a satisfying click. The guard, having finished eating and carrying his burger, was returning to the door when he heard a rustling sound and rushed in to ask what was wrong. The protagonist was casually sharpening the shock absorber, completely oblivious to the fact that the keys had vanished without a trace. He handed the car back to the guard and said, "I'm going back to my post." The guard continued scanning for metal objects as per procedure just to be sure. The scanner was completely silent, not making a single sound, and where had the keys gone? Only Dung and his poker face knew what was going on. But on his way home he was blocked by Kang Dai's group. The other guy was puffing on his cigarette like he was some big shot, while the male protagonist remained cool and composed. Then his younger brother started yelling and cursing, making Kang Dai annoyed. So he punched him for daring to challenge him. He said he knew Dung was planning to take advantage of him and wanted to join their team for a chance. But the male protagonist shook his head and flatly refused. Kang Dai frowned and exclaimed, "Don't be so cruel, it'll be humiliating." He then pulled out a chubby guy who was about to grab some of the delicious food the guard had bought for Dung, but the guy blocked him like a fence. Kang Dai waved his hand, telling him to leave, and the chubby guy tucked his tail between his legs. He watched the protagonist's back, longing to pull him back into the gang. It turned out Dung had hidden the key in the paper bag that wrapped the food, a sound both cool and discreet. Earlier, Uncle Dong Zich had said that to get to the camp, you had to cross 2 mountains and 3 gates, so escaping was impossible. Dung, however, insisted she didn't climb the wall but went through the main gate to make it look more impressive. The unfortunate thing was that as soon as she cautiously made her way back to her room, she found guard Jiang already sitting there, telling her to close the door and scolding her for being late. He was looking for Dung because she hadn't been vaccinated yet, and as soon as he mentioned her name, the mastermind doctor, who had been plotting for 5 years, pulled out a strange bottle of medicine. Luckily, in the men's section, the warden Jiang announced that Mai had a big fight to attend to, so someone else would administer the injection to avoid affecting her health. The mastermind glanced at the person in front of him and found her a little strange, while the warden instructed Dung to do a good job before leaving the young man with his heart pounding like a drum. The next morning, the guard led Dung out to the yard, where the gang members were already warming up. The young thugs were ready to take someone's life and the clock was ticking. Dung walked in and acted swiftly like cleaning a kitchen. 2 of the insignificant thugs lay motionless on the floor. He asked a brief question at lunchtime, then turned and walked away, leaving the gang members furious. But unfortunately, guard Jiang still had to take Dung to the injection site this time. The doctor poured the medicine from a fancy red bottle that looked terrifying. Dung had no way to avoid it, so she had to hold out her hand to the needle while muttering a countdown of 30 minutes, like she was timing some kind of plan. Episode 2: Life in prison is worse than a dog's. She only had cold showers and had to line up to be sprayed like a pig at the market. If he behaves well, he'll be promoted to first-class prisoner, get a thick winter coat, and have a chance for amnesty. That sounds motivating. Finally, the male protagonist officially becomes a prisoner, taking photos holding his name tag. A depressing sight. A lawyer named Sang-ji I1EAFC, claiming to be a public defender, jumps in to take on the case, saying he suspects there's a script behind it all. Dung also said over and over that he didn't know who Bak Na-dong was, but no one believed him, seeing that Sang-ji I1EAFC seemed empathetic. The male lead bowed his head and begged for help. The lawyer, whose face looked a bit untrustworthy, pulled out a voice recorder to ask a few questions. The male lead said there was one thing in court that was so confusing he forgot, which was the matter of the bracelet. The photo confirms that the bracelet wasn't his and that he'd never been to that place. He remembers his bracelet might have fallen in his younger brother's room because he stayed there the other day. Sang Jiok neatly recorded everything, then promised he would secretly investigate to get to the bottom of things. Telling Dung not to say a word to anyone, the male protagonist nodded and bowed in gratitude. As if meeting a benefactor in a dark tunnel that day, he was abducted by some thugs. But when Dung called for help from the guard, he was ignored. He was taken to a room where an old gang leader was present, surrounded by piles of liquor. The leader asked Dung how many years he was sentenced to, but he refused to say. He tried to escape but was dragged back by the gang members and kicked around like a dog. The leader knew Dung was serving a life sentence for the rape of someone's daughter and other related crimes, so he wanted Dung to confess, but Dung denied doing it. The guard was out inspecting things, so he said, "See you later, that guy." 2802. When Dung went home with his aching arm, a fellow inmate asked, "You're definitely doomed because the headmaster is interested in you." That guy even threw paper at Dung and mocked him for rapping a girl. The next morning, the group of people called the headmaster were bullying someone else, but Dung avoided them and went to a different table. Two chubby guys came to criticize Dung for looking so haggard. They advised him not to look at the headmaster or he'd be in trouble. They said the headmaster named Doc Soo was a gangster in real life. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, but because he had a lot of money, he got 12 years left. Doc Soo had a younger sister who was shot indiscriminately by some guy, so he hated those guys, and since Dung ended up in this place because of his shooting spree, he'd definitely be tortured until the day he got out of prison. The guy with the curly hair said he was protecting Dung, so the guy should just eat. Then the two guys dragged the male protagonist into the restroom to talk, but Dung was still scared, only to encounter two other guys in the room. And they laughed, anticipating their release. After that, there was the sound of the male protagonist's screams, seemingly from being anally penetrated. Later, Dung received Zin's death certificate, stating that he had logged out by untying the rope around his neck. The lawyer said he arrived late and only had time to hand over Zin's belongings before leaving. The loss of his last remaining loved one left the protagonist heartbroken and breathless at that moment. All he could do was cover his face and weep bitterly by the fence, unable to do anything more. A man with shaggy hair watched him from a distance. For days afterward, Dung sat silently on his bed, seemingly speechless, then chose to climb onto a chair with a rope. As his breath faltered and his body slowly faded, he heard his younger brother calling him. He remembered how Tin used to be jealous because he was as good at planting as their mother, while every plant his brother touched withered. Then he heard her reproach him, asking why he had harmed himself like that. He then woke up in his hospital bed under the cold white light. People whispered that this was the third time this month he had attempted suicide unsuccessfully. Psychological therapy hadn't worked. The man with the shaggy hair saw Dung lying listlessly on the bed, bound and lifeless. When friends came to visit, the jailer told them he refused to see his relatives the next time they returned. Nye and his friends, who had come every month for a year, were all turned away. They wanted to ask more questions but remained silent. The man with the shaggy hair, now a pastor, noticed Dung during the service. He wasn't as interested in Easter as the others, so the priest brought him bread. It was only on the third call that Dung slowly looked up. The man introduced himself as Dong Zich and offered him a piece of bread. Dung noticed the numerous scars on his wrists. Dong Zich advised him to quickly accept and adapt to this place. He knew it would be difficult, yet he gently urged him to keep living, causing Dung to break down in tears. Trembling, the injustice welled up in his throat, threatening to burst in the dark confines of prison. Dung decided to press the button to start anew. A version of life where he would endure the blows without giving up. Even with his face swollen like a dumpling, he gritted his teeth, swallowed his resentment, and rolled around doing push-ups until he lost consciousness. After that, he studied for his certification exams like a model student, and even planted 100 trees, to the point where the prison guard nodded in approval. Every day he was beaten like a sack of sand, and his legs were strangled like a pig's trotters. But as soon as he got back to his room, he secretly switched to a workout routine. Sativations one day, push-ups the next, without missing a single session. He ate his meals in tattered rags, but still chewed them as if he were signing a contract with a thick belt. Then one fine day, he brought home his first technical certificate, which boosted his spirits, and he continued training until his muscles were bulging. When provoked, he immediately retaliated. but because the other side was as numerous as a village festival, he still took a few more blows to complete the set. Dongzich then gave T-Dung a seemingly saintly but sophisticated gift. A Bible for him to read under the moonlight to soothe his mind. From then on, his meals tasted noticeably better, and the list of technical certifications poured in like fallen leaves, almost filling an entire bucket. Suddenly, 5 years have passed, a young man strolls into the room, adjusting some statues while simultaneously making a phone call as if he's very busy. Then he plops down in a technologically advanced surveillance room, his gaze sweeping across the area like a watchful eye. He watches a young man standing and drinking water in the middle of the city that morning. While T-Dung was tending to his mini garden, the guard approached, carrying a potted plant hidden behind his back, and asked why he didn't plant something edible to save money on vegetables. T-Dung just smiled dismissively. When asked if he wanted to complain about the bruises on his face, he shook his head, saying no. Next, the prison guard complained that the potted plant he'd been given was wilting. T-Dung explained it was due to lack of sunlight and offered to take care of it, even replacing the pot with a larger one to help it thrive. Just then Dongzich arrived with a cake, apparently obtained from the priest as a gift for the male protagonist. He also said he hoped she would maintain her current appearance, which made T-Dung feel that he was acting a little strange today, especially when he returned the bracelet, gave her all sorts of advice, and then revealed that today was the day Dongzich was released from prison and was wearing the ceremonial robes he had sent back to T-Dung. The two were both emotional and tried to crack jokes to ease their choked emotions. When he put on his civilian clothes, it slowly left. When T-Dung asked why he was so kind to her, he replied, "Because I wanted you to survive, that's why I had to do it." His steps that day were heavier and slower than usual. He quietly thanked her because T-Dung was the only one who had sat and listened to him. Just as he was about to leave, T-Dung suddenly shouted her thanks and bowed deeply, as if sending the entire garden and her heartfelt feelings with him. One day, as he closed his Bible, he saw a young man who was just as battered as he had been in the past. Now, he had changed his priestly attire to fit the shackles, so the guard took the other young man to see the priest for confession. T-Dung, both playful and stern, advised him to accept his prison life and then snatched the Bible from him for good luck. Unexpectedly, the young man choked out that he was innocent and regretted returning the phone to the prison guard. The exact same details about T-Dung's story from years ago sent chills down his spine. Before he could even catch his breath, lawyer Sang Jack appeared, claiming the case for the young man at that very moment. The protagonist realized this guy was in league with the group that fabricated the story. He even accused the young man's mother of signing up on her own, which made him furious. That night, T-Dung turned everything upside down like someone searching for keys in a storm. The next morning, he heard a loud noise and learned that the innocent boy had died after swallowing a page from the Bible. T-Dung's chest tightened, and he understood that the group was an organized gang. He arranged to meet Sang Jack again. The man continued playing his role perfectly, so T-Dung asked directly if he would help if T-Dung provided evidence. Then he asked if the man's face looked like he had committed a crime. Only then did Sang Jack smirk menacingly and confess to being an informant for a group that specialized in covering up evidence, approaching victims' relatives to dispose of the body and then staging it as a suicide. He even brazenly boasted about having dealt with the victim. He contemptuously remarked that a life-sentenced prisoner like him couldn't possibly accomplish anything. After saying this, he called someone, told them to handle any mistakes, and then slipped away. T-Dung returned to the confessional with the priest, refused to serve as altar boy and reopened his Bible, clinging to a last shred of composure. Then he reached under the chair, pulled out a small nail and hid it in his palm as a vow to God and to himself that he would seek justice for his younger brother. Episode 4. Finally, the mastermind still gave T-Dung the injection. The guy glanced at his watch like he was about to run a race, while guard Jiang was bewildered and didn't know anything. After leaving the injection room, the doctor messaged that everything would be ready in 30 minutes, which gave me goosebumps. Kim Phut scrolled past 5 minutes, and T-Dung reached into the mattress to pull out the nail and then dug out the key hidden under the bed. He glided down the corridor, dodging the guards like a slippery eel, then slipped into the familiar storage room. He shoved a nail into the socket, making a clicking sound, then grabbed a fire extinguisher and slammed it down, causing a short circuit. The whole area went dark, meaning the cameras were switched off. The guard locked the room and ran to check the power supply, while T-Dung unlocked the door and slipped in like a gust of wind. Seeing the security guard using an access card, he quickly grabbed one from the room, disguised as a janitor pushing a cart down the hallway. He glided through the room, making it look like he was on duty. He went to the storage room, unlocked the door, and was inside. He rummaged through everything, searching for civilian clothes to disguise himself and escape. After searching tirelessly, he found a few ordinary outfits, changed into them, and conveniently slipped on a watch to keep track of time before putting on his prison uniform to avoid suspicion. He continued pushing the janitor's cart, opening a side gate and closing it neatly. As he pushed the cart towards Section B, he briefly saw someone approaching and had to turn around and change direction. The security guard bent down to pick up a broom that had fallen in the path, then rushed into the warehouse to check. Seeing nothing unusual, he left because the protagonist was lying neatly under a garbage bag like a package waiting to be shipped. He felt dizzy and almost fell face down on the floor. but Dung gritted his teeth and staggered onward. Outside, Uncle Dong Zich was waiting, naturally very worried because he didn't understand how Dung had escaped meanwhile. Dung crept towards the emergency stairwell because, to avoid the guard's watchful eyes, the only way to get into Block B was through the ventilation shaft. He opened the hatch, took off his prisoner uniform, used a table as a platform, and climbed up the shaft in one go. Just then, the guard spotted a cart lying abandoned in the hallway, and heard strange noises coming from the ceiling, like a rat crawling around. He grabbed a broom and banged it loudly as if chasing away a rat, then shouted, "What kind of cleaning is this, letting rats run away?" A car slowly drove out the gate, causing Dong Zich to quickly look away, but the driver still recognized him and kept asking questions. As Dung crawled closer to the visiting room, she felt dizzy and disoriented. The person in the car was Warden Jiang, who got out and asked Dong Zich who he was visiting. The old man stammered that it was past visiting hours, so he had to leave. Meanwhile, Dung had already jumped into a room outside. Warden Jiang Hao Feng offered to help Dong Zich get in to visit, but the old man had to quickly decline because he was waiting for Dung. Just then, Warden Jiang's phone rang loudly. The person on the other end was very angry. He listened and grumbled, complaining about how the prisoners weren't cleaning up, letting rats run around, and not even turning off the lights. Afterward, Warden Jiang offered to take Dong Zich home, but he said he had a driver and would come back tomorrow. Dung staggered and felt dizzy, like he was seasick. He reached the public service corridor and slumped down, exhausted and dazed. Looking at his watch, he saw it was 3:57. Only 3 minutes left until the food delivery time. Suddenly, an old woman named Lanla started a conversation, complaining about visiting her grandchild and the terrible fate of that damn Dai Dong. Dung glanced at the bag she had left beside her, kicked the watch glass, cracked it, and then lightly cut open the bag to make a hole. By the time the old woman went to the counter to get her ID and go inside, her bag ripped and spilled its contents everywhere. Someone scolded her, saying they had told her not to bring food in, but she insisted. Taking advantage of the situation, Dung blended into the crowd and slipped out. As soon as she reached the door, she felt dizzy, only managing to see a food delivery truck whizzing past, and a memory of her girlfriend flashing through her mind. Finally, he collapsed, vaguely hearing the sound of footsteps running towards him elsewhere. The mastermind sat watching the racing cars revving their engines and speeding like bullets, still fantasizing about how much fun it would be if there was a button to release the bananas in the middle of the road so they would crash into each other and smoke billow out. This is real life, not a game, so why would he want to cause such chaos? It's truly outrageous. Even though the driver had just set a new record, he still demanded an accident just for the sake of drama before heartlessly cutting the sponsorship. Once he got home, he continued assembling his Lego set, building a private city while meticulously categorizing each car as if he were practicing numerology. He muttered to himself that he had found a new direction and then called an older woman over, and the two of them burst into frantic laughter. The sycophantic woman praised him, saying he looked every bit the young master in a way that was sickeningly sweet. He asked her to compile a list of clients connected to the Ministry of Justice. His dim-witted aunt, whom he called his nanny, nodded frantically as if receiving a general mobilization order. A car pulled up in front of the gate, revealing a very important guest, prompting the security guard to shout, "Open the gate." Inside, the supervisor was in a state of utter chaos, barely catching his breath, when the director burst in without warning. Following closely behind was a spoiled young man who jumped in and started messing with the supervisor's belongings, leaving also bewildered and prompting him to politely ask the young man to leave. Yet the supervisor casually remarked, "Agree to whatever he says." The young man then climbed onto the desk, acting like the boss of the place, and threw down a stack of red-covered files containing a proposal for volunteer environmental protection activities at the abandoned factory. Next came a gift bag that sounded luxurious, but upon opening revealed a treasure trove of gold worth around 200 million, along with a promise of an additional 5 gold bars as a reward for good performance. He even brought up the warden's past to intimidate him, leaving the old man speechless. Finally, he meekly asked, "What do you need me to do?" To which he declared, "The final condition for allowing prisoners to go out to work, just mix in enough people for violent robbery and other crimes. If there aren't enough, just pick someone you dislike." At the same time, Warden Jiang silently recorded the escape route with his camera, then crawled into the ventilation shaft following the exact same path, jumped down into a room, slipped through the corridor leading to the civil services room, and discovered that there was indeed an exit. One more step and they were straight to the main gate. He stood there stunned, not expecting Dung to be able to walk through the large gate so confidently. Dung snapped out of his daze, seeing the doctor sitting beside him sighing in relief, saying it was lucky the priest discovered it in time, otherwise he would have been dead. He also mentioned that there was a trace of high-concentration medicine in his blood, leaving him bewildered and unable to understand what was happening. Dung staggered and vomited violently, his throat burning. Just then, Warden Jiang came in to inquire about the situation. Some said he had escaped, others said he had eaten something poisoned with rat poison and collapsed. He didn't pursue the matter further, but he knew someone was playing dirty, so he promised to be more vigilant. He also subtly reminded him that the incident of him wearing civilian clothes through the main gate would be overlooked once, and hoped he wouldn't do it again, lest his heart jump out of his chest. He said he trusted and helped T-Dung because he knew she was a good person before. Meanwhile, Kang Dai called his subordinates for an emergency meeting about the prison break and the drug deal. Everyone nodded in agreement, saying this was no simple matter that night. Someone whispered to the headmaster that T-Dung's group was as numerous as a marketplace. Unfortunately, the headmaster was still in solitary confinement, so he could only grit his teeth and swallow his anger. The guards let him out but told him to behave himself in his room. The old man's insults about picking a fight with T-Dung out of sheer cowardice, like a frightened dog, kept repeating in his head, making his face turn purple. His henchmen arrived to greet him like a thunderbolt. And he snarled, demanding to go to the infirmary because the male lead was lying there. Wherever he went, people parted like water separating. The people in the infirmary also silently stepped out and switched off the lights with a click, leaving a thick asphalt-like darkness. The old doctor, sneaking out to smoke, was caught by Warden Jiang. He insisted he was out to avoid any involvement and had nothing to do with it, which made Warden Jiang sense something unusual around T-Dung. Meanwhile, Doc Du was cowardly, playing sneaky tricks, stabbing repeatedly without realizing he'd just been hitting the pillow. The male protagonist, hanging from the ceiling, descended and stomped on the insignificant prisoners like clearing weeds. The final blow was capturing a reporter as a hostage. When Warden Jiang arrived, the guards didn't bother to move aside, mistaking him for a stranger in civilian clothes. T-Dung was still seasick from the rat poison, so they pointed their weapons at him and ganged up on him like typical thugs. But then the protagonist's aura flared up, and he swiftly knocked each of them down, grabbing a fire extinguisher and smashing them all as easily as clearing a shelf. On the other side, the old warden was stuffing money into his subordinates' pockets, but before the money even warmed his hands, Warden Jiang slammed the alarm button loudly. At this moment, T-Dung was still surrounded in the infirmary. As soon as one person was subdued, another would come, grabbing a fat guy who was about to strangle him. T-Dung grabbed a pair of pliers and stabbed it straight into the guy's hand, freeing him. Finally, only T-Dung Sia's beat remained in the room, panting and looking outside. He saw that the headmaster was still as cowardly as ever, not daring to take action, only hiding behind his henchmen. The police had arrived, but the gang had locked themselves inside, like building a nest of termites inside. Doc Su offered T-Dung a cigarette, feigning friendliness, then seized the opportunity to stab him from behind. A coward will always be a coward. He was immediately beaten up by the male protagonist. He clutched his wound with one hand and grabbed the other man's neck with the other, managing to hold on for a few moments, though his injuries made maneuvering a bit difficult. The stubborn henchman continued to block the door, preventing the guards from entering. Meanwhile, Doc Du, consumed by hatred, charged forward and stabbed again. At that moment, T-Dung Lat didn't see him off. His face remained defiant and arrogant. Then, just as everyone rushed in, he knocked the bully sprawling in a puddle of mud. Because of this fight, T-Dung was thrown into solitary confinement. There, he saw his younger brother as if in a dream. Then suddenly he was dragged away with his head covered. The others were treated the same way. Anyone who resisted got a beating. They were all handcuffed and dragged into the vehicle, wobbling like pigs being transported to a market. The vehicle sped away, disappearing from sight, while Guard Jiang went back inside to deal with the aftermath. The mastermind sat reading the list of 12 people that had been sent to him, clearly pleased to see that one of them had a criminal record for rapping his sister and still denying it. Then he flipped to T-Dung's file, carefully memorizing the information. The next morning, everyone, dressed in numbered robes, walked into a miniature arena. From atop the stage, a leader stood and introduced this land of opportunity, a name that sent shivers down one's spine.